Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us. So I think we're going to start all of these episodes with laughter because we make faces at each other when we are starting the recording. So I think that's just what's going to happen. I think we need to up our game and continue to try to make each other laugh. Let's bring it next time. Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome, friends. If you are here, if you're here. What the fuck? Oh my God. Hello, welcome. So you are here because you're listening, because if you weren't here, you wouldn't hear what I had to say. So if you would like to support the podcast, there are a couple ways that you can do that. We have merch. We have some cute merch. You can get t-shirts. You can get stickers, tote bags, all kinds of like baby onesies, I think, even. If you really want your baby going around in Conversations with a Wounded Healer merch, like nothing would make me happier. And if you want some merch, you can go to tinyurl.com/CWH merch. That's tinyurl.com/CWHMERCH. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, which is soups helpful. We've gotten some lovely reviews lately, and I appreciate it so much. And I have to be honest, I've bugged some of my friends to do it. So if you're my friend and you're listening and you haven't made a review, I'm mad at you until you do one. So please do it. I'm not actually mad. And you can also, I think on Spotify, you can give us 5 stars. I'm poking like I'm giving stars right now.
You sure are.
But you can't see it. And on Patreon, you could give us as little as $1 a month. And every little bit helps because Andrea and her team at the Creative Imposter Studios are worth every fucking penny that we pay them. And it helps me to kind of offset a little bit of those costs. So that is patreon.com/convos with a wounded healer. Or you can just search Conversations with a Wounded Healer on Patreon. So, Anne, hi.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, we just checked in on another recording, but how are you now since 14 minutes ago?
I'm even more mesmerized by your hair. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you all cannot see this, but it is a rainbow mohawk and the gradient on it is perfect. So I am just staring at it.
Yeah. Shout out to Carrie at Reverend Billy's Chop Shop in Lincoln Square. She is my new stylist because my old stylist moved to Schaumburg. So go to hell, D. Yay, Carrie. Just kidding. She's actually, D is a Satanist. So she would be like, go to hell. Okay.
Sweet.
I love it. But
yeah, that's how I am. How are you?
Great. I'm in pain, actually. Yeah. And it's really interesting. I've, since the podcast has existed, sort of been on this journey of healing my sexual abuse from childhood. And I am at an intersection right now where I've had more, I don't want to say memories because it's not like repressed memories that are coming back, but it's sort of this like knowing, like something will happen and there will be this knowing inside of me that, oh, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And I've been working with this alchemist healer guy who is never going to be on the podcast. He's told me, he's like, I can't put myself out there. It's too dangerous. But I've been working with Daryl for a while, and we've noticed that every time I get another piece of the puzzle, I end up having physical pain as a result. So there's something that my body is like working out and working through. And I'm trying to be really patient, but it is really frustrating to be in pain or have injuries. And, I'm doing everything that I can, but I also, now that I'm putting that part together, I'm realizing there's not a lot I can do except keep moving forward, Man,
so I've been learning a lot about pain science recently and a lot about how it ties to trauma, to events that happened. even if the pain itself
Mhm.
is not directly associated with the event.
Yep.
And there's a pain scientist I follow, Alan T. Gordon, who has some
Ooh.
really, maybe I'll try to get him on the podcast, but
Ooh.
highly recommend. He's got some really
I'm
amazing
Googling him now.
stuff about just the links between pain and anxiety and what's going on in your mind. And yeah, he's really great.
Yes, please reach out to him, because that would be I might like to join you for that one, because that sounds really interesting. And for me, since I know you're a yoga person, so you know the chakras, for me, the pain manifests either in my second chakra, which is like all of the like reproductive organs, which makes sense with sexual abuse, or around my throat chakra, like my shoulders, big issue, which I think has to do with like not being able to talk about it or something like that. Being silenced. So interesting, huh?
You know, anytime someone starts telling me about physical ailments, I immediately want to like dig and pry. And I'm like resisting the urge to like, not even, not diagnose, but like to draw correlations, because this is what I do with my clients quite a lot.
You've read Eastern Body, Western Mind, right?
It is my jam.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That one is, and I'm just reading her other book at the moment. Yeah.
Anadea Judith, saying that for the notes, because I know they're going to pull that out.
I just started another book, The Wheels of Life, but I love that stuff. And I'm sorry to hear that you're experiencing pain, but excited for you that you're able to kind of draw those different connections with different parts of your body, if that's an okay thing for you to hear.
Yes. No, I take that and I appreciate it. Yeah. Should we talk about Alyse?
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about Alyse. So I didn't realize until I started listening to the episode and you were like, I have a bunch of your stickers. And I looked her up and I was like,
I have a bunch of her stickers.
Holy shit. Like I have reposted so many of her illustrations and I have a bunch of her stickers as well. And so then I felt like I was listening to a rock star situation. It was like, sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I asked her to be on the podcast probably in 2020, actually, I think. And she said yes. And then we just like, I don't know. I ask so many people and then things fall apart and then like they come back into my life for whatever reason. And so I asked her again and she's like, actually, yes, I just wrote a book. And so this is a great time for me to be on the podcast. And I was like, see, the universe works out in beautiful ways. So she's someone that I have appreciated. And it's funny, when I first started following her, I didn't know she was in Chicago because like, I don't know, you're just, following people on Instagram, you don't know. And then she ended up working for a practice with a guy that I know. And I was like, oh my God, you're here. That's so cool.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. So I didn't realize she was from Chicago, and I had been following her and like, I'd ended up with all her stickers and reposting her stuff. And so that was a nice, like, oh, sweet. Like when I move home someday.
Yep.
Yeah, it was great. And you guys talked about so many things that made me go, like I had so many vocal reactions listening to this. And when you started talking about like TikTok diagnosing of ADHD, I braced myself and I was like,
right.
Oh. And then you went, oh, and I was like, yes, okay.
Well, duh. I mean, you know how I feel.
I struggle so much with, and because I work with a younger population generally, and I have people coming in being like, I think I have ADHD. And I'm like, why do you think that?
Right.
Well, TikTok told
me. Yeah.
And I'm like, cool. Okay. And the first question I always ask is, what is the purpose of you wanting a diagnosis? Because I can't give you one.
Exactly. Yes.
And what is that going to do for you? And then let's go from there.
Yeah.
But and hearing Alyse talk about accessibility in different ways and hearing the way that you kind of make your classrooms more accessible. Yeah, it as an able-bodied person made me think about things in a very different way. And as someone who doesn't have any learning difficulties and who has thrived in the Eurocentric teaching style, it just made me think about things very, very differently. So I was really grateful to hear her experience with that and for you to kind of opening that up.
Yeah. I love opening cans of worms. Delicious.
Yeah.
Yum. Well, I just feel weird. I'm a weirdo this morning, especially weird. Shall I introduce Alyse?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. Alyse Ruriani, she, they, is a queer, femme, registered art therapist, licensed professional counselor, illustrator, and person with lived experience. Their work aims to communicate information, provide tangible tools, and validate the human experience through engaging illustrations and designs. When Alyse is not working, you can likely find her swimming in some body of water, making art with friends, or hyperfixating on some new idea. And I want to look, what's her book? I'm leaning over to find the book. The Big Feelings Survival Guide, which you can find anywhere you buy your books. We particularly love bookshop.org over here.
Oh.
So, yeah.
I just want to shout out to something she did in her bio was say she's a person with lived experience, because we don't get to like put that on our resumes enough, and like so important. So love that. Thank you, Alyse, for doing that.
Yeah. Well, enjoy this killer conversation. Alyse. Hello, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
OMG. I'm fangirling because I've been following you on Instagram forever.
Yeah.
And were you always in Chicago?
Since I've like been active on Instagram, yeah, but I'm from outside Philly.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. Yes. Well, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. It is so lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah. Well, I will have read your bio to everyone to tell them all of those, whatever things that we say about ourselves that are very clinical and clean. But like, how do you say who and what you are in this world?
Yeah. Well, I often kind of phrase it as I feel like I wear a lot of different hats. Not that I really wear many hats in real life.
Metaphorical
my hair
hats.
My hair is super curly, but metaphorical hats of, being a therapist, an art therapist, but then also just being like an illustrator and artist of like my own art practice, and then some like advocacy work and like consulting and things like that. So they're all like very interconnected, but also separate at the same time.
Yeah. What came first? I'm guessing maybe the artistry.
Yeah, I'd say, the artistry. Yeah, definitely. Because I've been, always been pretty creative as a kid, and so have probably been making some form of art for like most of my life.
When did you realize that you were good at it?
It's a good question. I think I was always told that I was creative. I think because I was just like often doodling and things, and so that stuck out. But I do remember my grandmother once bought me a bunch of like markers and supplies because I was making these like geometric designs on these like bookmarks, and she was like, these are the best things ever, and wanted me to continue making them. And so I feel like that kind of sounds like, oh, people actually like what I make, like it's not just me being a kid and people just entertaining it. But yeah, so I think like I just sort of started doing it more, and people seem to like it. So
yeah, I mean, I don't want to accidentally close my computer, but I have 3 of your stickers, I think, on my computer right now.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. I love seeing them, what people put them on, too. I've seen them on water bottles, on computers.
I don't have one of yours on my water bottle, but yeah.
Yeah.
And tell us your therapist origin story, because I feel like these are always juicy and yummy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I came to Chicago for grad school, and I knew I wanted to be an art therapist for a pretty long time. Probably like, I was like 14 or 15.
Wow.
Which is not super common for art therapy, because it's not as well known of a field. I mean, it's getting more known, but especially then, like, I think a lot of people kind of found the career later. And so they either, they maybe were doing something else and then they learn about it. So they go get their prerequisites and then go to grad school. Mm-hmm. So I was one of the few who just was like straight from undergrad into grad school. But yeah, I just knew I wanted to do it. I had received art therapy as an adolescent, and it was super helpful to me and just gave me like another way to process things. I had a really hard time talking about my feelings like verbally. I remember like many a therapy session, I would just sit in total silence with my therapist as a teenager. And so I think art I was already doing art on my own to like process my own experiences, and then learning that art therapy was a thing. I was like, wait, this is really exciting.
Yeah.
So then I kind of had it in my head because I had been thinking about like wanting to do something in mental health, but also really liking art. And so it felt kind of like the perfect combination.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think so many of us, it's either like people told us we should be a therapist because they're always telling us our problems anyway, and or the experiences we have being touched by a therapist or, you know, somebody else who believed in you in some way as a child, especially in moments when you're struggling.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think like I've always been a very like sensitive person. And so I think a lot of people would come to me with things that they're struggling with. But I also, think apt to what this podcast title is of like my own struggles and working through those and seeing kind of like the power in, especially in art therapy, and also having not great experiences with therapists. I think also in another way is a motivator of like, I want to be a therapist that like I wish I had, you know, or like be able to like bring different things to the field. So it's not, you know, kind of that both of like, there's therapists where I'm like, I want to be like you, and then therapists where I'm like, I don't want to be like you. And both of those have motivated me to, you know, to do this work.
I mean, it's an open secret that I started this podcast because I'm so pissed at therapists that don't do their own work.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to share any like horror stories?
I'm trying to think.
Let's gossip.
Great question. Yeah, I think, you know, like, I think sometimes the horror stories are like, even if in the grand scheme of the relationship wasn't bad, like the certain ruptures that stick out. And I think sometimes like recognizing like where there wasn't repair, like I think as a therapist now, it's not that like ruptures don't happen, but it's that the repair process is what's super important.
Right.
And I would say like, for example, like me as a teenager having like completely silent sessions, like I'm like, okay, the therapist could have done a little, you know, not that you can make someone talk, but like they could have been like, what music are you listening to? You know, like if I was like finding ways to like build that rapport, because clearly I was not comfortable talking. And I think it's interesting how those experiences like impact me now, where like with my current therapist, we have like my brain will probably, you know, thinking of dissociation stuff, but my brain will just like go blank. Like, you know, when as therapists we're like, oh, like what's on your mind or what's coming up? And I would literally be like, literally nothing. Like there's not a thought in my brain. And so we'll check in of being like, oh yeah, I would have that experience where I would like just be silent, didn't have anything to think of, or would have something to say and just felt like I couldn't. And so I like can use that now of like, my therapist will be like, is this a brain empty moment or is this a like you're reflecting moment? And I'll be like, brain empty. And we're like, okay, so like let's, you know, adjust. But yeah, I think just like recognizing that like when you're working with teenagers, like
you better have that. You gotta have a deck of Uno in there in your
yes, exactly. Like you gotta have something to connect with them, because that silence, like we know that silence can be really helpful, but in those instances, you know, it really wasn't. So you know, just recognizing those things.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious because I've got a lot of new therapists that listen to this podcast, and I'm sure a lot of them are thinking, well, what do you do then when the client's head is blank? Yeah. So like what works for you? Give us an example of where you go next in your own therapy when your mind blanks out.
Yeah. Sometimes it is just like checking in with like, okay, is mind blank because of like a trigger? Like it's something like my brain is like, we're not ready to talk about that. And so we might check in of like, okay, does that feel like too tender right now? And we don't need to, you know, talk about it. It could be sometimes if it's like mind blank. I also have ADHD. So like sometimes it's like mind blank. I got distracted by something. And so sometimes that might be, okay, is it helpful for us to like, for me to reiterate what I had just said or what we just were talking about? And then that might make me think of something. But also, yeah, sometimes it is just like, okay, that happened and like we can talk about something else. But I think also I think a lot of times that would happen when I felt like I had to say something. Like I was like I was like, I'm supposed to respond. Yeah. It's like when someone is like, what's your favorite song? And you're like, I can't think of any song I've ever listened to in my life now that you asked that question. You know, so sometimes I think it goes a little bit like that.
Right. Hold on, let me get my Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm like, having that rapport too with my therapist, like I think I'm like, it's lessened the like, okay, I know that I can have nothing in my brain and that is okay. Like that'll be fine, you know? So
yeah. Let's talk about neurodivergence for a second, because you mentioned that you have ADHD, because ADHD TikTok is driving me bananas. Yeah. So I want to hear your thoughts on this trend that we have now that we all have ADHD.
Yeah, totally. Well, think it's interesting because I'm in the camp of I do think self-diagnosis can be really helpful. And I think there can be a lot of misinformation, obviously, on TikTok. And sometimes not even misinformation, but it's like missing nuance. Like it might be accurate, but it's not like, oh, this thing that is common in folks that have ADHD doesn't mean you have it. Like if you relate to it, doesn't mean you have it. But, you know, like the way that I kind of have talked to it with clients, because I'll have clients bring in TikToks and things for various things. And it's like, this is good information. Like, what are you relating to in this? And like, can we talk about that experience and whether or not it is going to be, you know, attached to a diagnosis at some point? Like, I want to validate that experience is something you're experiencing. And then we can talk about like, okay, yeah, like, I remember I made a video on TikTok one time kind of about this of, you know, I think some therapists can be really dismissive of it. And I think that makes clients really frustrated because they're like, well, this is something I relate to. And I'm like curious about it. And so it's like, you know, just like describing like, okay, if someone is talking about a certain symptom, that could be a symptom that is for a variety of reasons. It could be trouble concentrating because you're depressed. It could be trouble concentrating because you have anxiety. It could be because of ADHD, you know? And so kind of taking a step back of like, it's important that we recognize what is the thing you're relating to, but then we have to put it in context of all of these things. I was late diagnosed with ADHD. So it was interesting actually, because I feel like I would see things about ADHD and I was like, okay. Like, yeah, I kind of relate to that. Like, that sounds kind of familiar. And I remember actually I went to, I think the story is so funny. So I just moved to Chicago and was trying to find a new medication provider just to continue. Like, I was like, I don't need anything different. Like, I've been on the same medications, like, just need someone to continue. So I go and see this psychiatrist and I'm like, okay, I already have a bunch of diagnoses. They're like, okay, what? I'm like, okay, well, do you want the ones that like are current or like the history of things, you know, like, and so, you know, I give my whole laundry list of things. And then she does like the tests for each of those. And I was like, I'm not going to fit the criteria because I'm not currently in a depressive episode. You know, like I'm not currently in a depressive episode. I do have depression, but you know, exactly. Yeah. And so she does all these things and, you know, we have like a 45-minute, you know, meeting. And at the end of it, she's like, I actually don't think you have any of these. I think you have really complex ADHD. And I was like, what? I was like, I came in here being like, I've got my meds, I've got my diagnoses. Like, I mean, I don't think that was the best way to go about that information.
Especially
like,
with a new provider.
Yeah, I just saw you and I have years and years of experience in mental health treatment and you're met me for 45 minutes and you're like, all of that's wrong. Here's what you have. And so I was really upset. And I remember leaving and calling my dad crying, being like, I don't know. I just trying to get my medication. So the whole thing. And then months later I just kept thinking about it. Like I just kept being like, no one's ever mentioned that to me. And again, I had been in therapy a very long time. Like I've been in a lot of different treatment. No one has ever brought up ADHD. And yeah, I just kept thinking about it more and more. And I knew some people who had it and I started reading more about it. And I was like, maybe I should look into this. So I ended up talking to the psychiatrist that I had when I was living in Baltimore because I had been seeing her for like several years in college. And we talked about it and she was like, I am sorry that I missed this. Like, I think you're right. Like, I think that this is ADHD.
They apologized.
They did, yeah, which was really nice of like just acknowledging that. Beautiful. Like, because I was really frustrated, like, to think about that it had been like, you know, years and years, and being like, how did no one ever catch this? And thinking about how different things might have been if I had known that I was neurodivergent and the things that, you know, are just being ascribed to like, oh, it's because you're depressed, or oh, it's because, you know, you're anxious or whatever. And so, I kind of see those like both sides of like, there are things that that would have been explained by ADHD that weren't, but also like can be the opposite just as true. Like the people saying, you know, oh, this probably is ADHD, but it could be something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what I find problematic, and it's not just clients that do this, but I think therapists too, is blaming whatever like behavior or process on the diagnosis instead of recognizing that we have agency. Like, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have a trauma history, but that doesn't mean I can't do anything. I think that's what I find people being like, I just want this. Like, I mean, I've had supervisees who will say, yeah, I have a client that like just wants me to write them a letter so that they can like get out of going to class or something. Like, no, you can't. No, that's not what a diagnosis is for.
Yeah. And that's where, like, I think, like, discussions about, like, about accommodations of, like, what is, we absolutely can get accommodations. But, like, was it that, I don't have to show up to class? No. But I did get a 15-minute grace period that, like, I wouldn't be considered late, you know, whereas, like, if, you know, like, a lot of times in school, it's like, if you're late more than 5 minutes a couple times, that counts as an absence. And then you're only allowed to be absent, like, 3 times. And it's like, okay, if you've got, let alone mental health stuff, but also I have chronic illness. It's like, if all of those things, I'm like, this is not accessible to me. So, like, sometimes it's finding that, like, what accommodations will allow me to be able to show up and, like, I'm getting that support that I need, but it's not like if I was just allowed to miss class, like, a lot of times I probably wouldn't have gotten out of bed, like, you know, and so it's like needing some of that structure, some of that accountability while also getting the accommodation, getting the support I need in order to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on ableism in general, because it's something that as a professor, truly I hadn't thought about how, because I really did well in the Eurocentric education system. And so it literally did not occur to me that everyone can't show up on time. Everyone can't turn in their papers on time. And so I have really, really struggled with how to, because I think that being a therapist is a privilege. And so I do think that my students need to show up in a certain way that I can trust they're going to care for other people. And yet at the same time, I want to make sure I am making room and making accommodations for people who don't show up like me in an educational setting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think it's such an important topic, because it does feel kind of silly sometimes when I think about how much ableism is in the mental health field when we're working with people who are disabled, like, you know, like a lot of people who are disabled. And so this is where I kind of feel too, it's like, you know, we have the wounded healer terminology, and then there's like impaired professionals, like there's just like all this terminology of like, you know, trying to figure out like what, you know, we obviously need to have certain capabilities and skills in order to like do this work and show up. And also that might look different for people. So like, I think of like thinking about time, like most of my clients like know that I'm going to be online within 5 minutes of our appointment time. I will always add you know, like, it's like not a, like, you lose those 5 minutes. It's like, we have, you know, doctors show up whenever the hell they want.
Yeah, they do.
Having a 5 minute, you know, I'm like, within the 5 minutes we get started. And if a client has struggles with that, then we're like, okay, we'll start our session at 2:05, you know, or we'll start a session 5 minutes in, so that it's still accommodating my, like, I could struggle to be there on that dot. But it, you know, is that grace for being human. And so, but I think ableism, I think in education, I think a lot of people don't realize they can get accommodations, especially for mental health stuff. Like they don't think of that as a disability, but for a lot of folks it is. And so once I got my ADHD diagnosis, I did go and get accommodations, and, you know, and a lot of times that you get a letter, you sit down with your professor, and we would talk about like, okay, what is this going to look like for us? And so we decide, okay, if I get extensions on things, when do I tell you that I need the extension? Is it okay for it to be, you know, a couple days before? Do I need to let you know, and they can ask me like, what usually happens for you? And like, how would that, you know, so I think a lot of it is just collaborating on it and making sure that the student, you know, feels safe to talk to you about it. Because what happens is, and I think especially with ADHD, we know shame is a huge part of ADHD, and like that internalized shame about whatever, you know, symptoms and things. And so that shame could keep me from talking to a professor about it, because I am internalizing I'm bad because I can't get to class on time. And they're going to be mad at me that I can't, versus being like, hey, this is something I struggle with. How can you support me to like, you know, that we can make this work? Because we do need disabled therapists. You know, like my own therapist has chronic illness as well. And that's been like invaluable to me as I've been navigating a lot of chronic health stuff, and being able to have that modeled to me of how to be a therapist, you know, with lived experience, how to be a therapist who has chronic health issues, because we need diversity. And I think a lot of times we forget about ability when it comes to diversity. You know, like I might need a lower caseload number and I'm still full-time because it takes me longer than a neurotypical or non-disabled therapist. That doesn't make me not as good of a therapist. And I have a lot of clients who have chronic health stuff. And so like being able to model that for them too, of like, we can be in these professions, we can do these things. We just need support.
Yeah. Well, there's so much there. What do I want to say first? When you were talking about the shame that can get in the way of like talking to your professor. So this is where power comes in, right? And I think about, I mean, I'm going to toot my own horn here, but I think I'm a pretty fucking cool professor. Like, let's be honest.
I'm sure.
I'm cool. I'm cool as fuck. And it's funny that, I mean, I don't think that there is anything else that I could do to create a safer space. Like no space is safe. I'm in for brave spaces because we're going to have hard conversations. I'm going to challenge you because that's my job. But I mean, I couldn't be more chill. And what I've done with the students now is I say, like, tell me what makes you feel respected. And I'm going to tell you what makes me feel respected. And what makes me feel respected is communication. So when you were saying like collaboration, that's what I'm asking. I'm asking for students, just tell me. And like this last semester, I had a student who just like didn't turn in a paper and then just didn't say anything. And I'm like, that part, because I also try to prepare them for the working world and like saying that like that could get you fired. Just, you know, that's a no call, no show, right? In terms of coming to work. So where is the responsibility, right? Because as a person with more power, as the professor, I do take a lot of that responsibility in trying to create that space. What more do you think needs to be done for people who are shaming themselves to feel like they can come forward? Is it a system change or like what? What's up?
Yeah. I think, you know, I wonder if obviously like every person's different, but I think it could even just be naming that, you know, like we could be like, yeah, come to me, but we could even name like, hey, I know it can be really hard to come to your professor and like you might feel shame about it, but like I truly want to support you. And so, and also too, I think telling people like it doesn't have to be at like a crisis level before you tell me. Like it's accommodate, which like is true for so many things. But I think especially it's like they might have been like, yeah, I can write this paper, and then all of a sudden the week before they're like, I can't do this, and panic and not, you know, where it's like, okay, even if like how can we build in more check-ins or being like, hey, I just want to, this paper's coming up, like if anyone is concerned, whatever, like let me know, we can talk about it. So I think like just like having avenues for that, and I think even just sometimes like explicitly sort of naming that you get that piece can come up and that like people can come to you even if they like, one thing that helped me was being like, even if I might not need the extension or I might not need that specific accommodation, having it in place is helpful. So being like, okay, even if I'm a little bit like, I'm a little concerned I'm not gonna be able to get this paper in on time, in advance, I'm gonna be like, can I have, and it might just be like building that skill of like asking for that support ahead of time, because we don't need to wait until it's like right before and then you're like, I'm screwed. Right. Like, and I've made a mistake and I'm in a shame spiral and I'm just gonna avoid, you know? But there is only so much you can do too. You know, like there's ways you can support, and also it is also, you know, people need to take you up on that. Right.
Well, I'm thinking about the challenge of teaching online, and I think because I just teach in the addiction track, and I think that's going to stay online, and I can only see so much. Because like if I were in person, I would know which student is struggling because I would see them check out or like whatever. But when they're on Zoom and they just turn their camera off, I don't know if they're just like going to pee, getting a snack, or they're like having a mental breakdown, right? Or mentee B, as we like to say.
Mentee B, No, that's so true. And I think is interesting, like how virtual has shifted, you know, things, and in a lot of ways that can be helpful, but in a lot of ways that also lose some of that information. And I think also I wonder how the virtual can impact like building that relationship with a professor of like, you're not in that space, you know, with them. And I think about that as a therapist too, of like working virtually, building rapport, like, you know, it is interesting doing it where we're just on screens.
Well, and I think too, I mean, our conversation now is making me think that what I want to put forward, because I've been talking about mutual respect, but I want to put forward that I want to build a relationship with you individually and as a class. And I'm not the best professor, but I'm different than the academic professors in that my focus is all clinical. That's all I'm there for. I'm an adjunct. And so I don't think they believe me. I usually feel like the first class, there's always one or two that are like obsessed with me and like, yes, I love you. Oh my God. And they're like really picking up what I'm putting down. And then the rest of them are like either suspicious that I'm like full of shit, or they're just like, what is this? So I want, and talking about having more disabled therapists, having more queer teachers and professors and people of color that are professors. And I wish that academia could shift, but it's never going to. But the more adjuncts that are hired, hopefully there's more well-rounded education that's happening in these schools.
Yeah. And I think virtual, the pandemic, I think obviously brought up disability a lot. Not only that COVID is a mass disabling event for people, but also, I know in our program, because I graduated into the pandemic. I graduated in May of 2020. So that last couple months of my program was just a sudden shift of like, oh, we're actually all online now. Your internship's over. Yeah. We're just going to get through these 3 months and then you're done, And so, but I remember in our program, we talked a lot about like frustration over accessibility and talked about like, okay, can we incorporate virtual of like, if I have such high pain, I can't get downtown to go to school, but I can join class on Zoom. Right. Can we do that? And I'm still in class. I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm still listening. And a lot of times the answer was like, no, we just can't really do that. And then COVID happened and everything transitioned to virtual. Yeah. And a lot of parts are still virtual. And we were like, no, you did have it. You just didn't want to put in that effort, work or weren't able to do that effort and, in order to do it. But it did give us an example of like, well, that actually was possible, and that is a way of like, I do value in person. Like I would not have wanted to do a fully virtual therapy program. Like that's a whole other thing. But like to make it accessible, like if it is an issue sometimes for me to get to class or, anyone to get to class, can that be an option of like versus being like, well, you just miss out because you can't physically come to class that day, and then thinking about, with COVID, with being sick of like, how many times are students coming to class and they've got a cold or something, and then it's like people getting sick. It's like, if we can like have built-in methods of like, how can this be accessible? If there's certain classes where that doesn't really work because of whatever the format, that's different. Right. But like, I think about like our fieldwork supervision class, like I can join that, like we're still here. You still know me. And one time we did do that actually for one of my professors open to it, not for me, but one of my friends had broken her foot or something. And like, it was really hard to get to like anywhere, doing all this traveling. Yeah. And so we like put her on the big screen of the overhead and it was we were like, hey, like, and she got to be part of class. And so
that's cool.
I think that's a good example of like that, how can we adjust and make it more possible for disabled folks, whether temporarily disabled or not, like to show up because like I bring value to that conversation. Right. And the class is missing out by me not being able to be there because we don't have systems in place to make it accessible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that lends really beautifully to the, wounded healer questions. How do you feel first about the term healer?
Yeah, I think it's something that I remember talking about a lot in school. My program was very social justice oriented.
Which program did you do?
The Art Institute of Chicago.
Of course, okay.
Art therapy, okay. Art therapy and counseling program. I really wanted to stay at an art school because I went to an independent art school, the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. And I was like, I really like art school environment and really wanted my artist identity to like still be there. There's a lot of art therapy programs where it's kind of like, well, you're just a counselor and then you like also use art sometimes. Right. And like, I was like, no, I'm like an artist and a therapist and an art therapist. And so this program really, focused on that. And so I picked it for that and also their values. And so we did talk a lot about the term healer. And I think I've sort of landed on like, I personally don't use it for myself. And I think part of it is like, it feels presumptuous a little bit to be like, I am a healer. Like, I don't like, and I think like for me, it just doesn't sit great of like, I am in the healing work, but like, I don't feel like I heal my clients. Like, I'm not like coming in and like providing this magic cure to whatever, is stressing them out or whatever they're struggling with. I see it more as like, I facilitate that. So, I think like that wounded healer, there's like that whole archetype, so that can be a little different, but I think I tend to stray away from things like that. And honestly, I think I I'm even thinking of how I like describe my practice. And like, I will often be like, I strive to create like a safe space, or I strive to, bring anti-oppressive practices. But like, especially being a white person, especially, for me to be like, it's kind of like when people are like, I'm an ally. And it's like, okay, like, you're not wrong. But like, if that is you're walking in, it's like, that's my identity. It's like, actually, the marginalized people get to decide whether or not you are, actually showing up. So I'm like, for me, I don't want to walk in and be like, I'm a healer. And then my clients are like, are you though? So yeah, I think I'm more like in the healing work, and also to honor, like, I think, I don't know all the history of the term healer, but like, I often think of like indigenous practices and like healers and that. And so being like wanting to honor that, like, that is not the work that I do. And like that term can mean something really different, in different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does wounded healer fit you?
Yeah, I think that one, I remember when I was researching, like, I actually did my thesis on therapists with lived experience. And that's usually the term that I use. I think partially because when I started doing mental health advocacy work as like a teenager and like late teenager into college, I was part of like the American Association of Suicidology, and they often use the term lived experience to signify people who have lived experience of suicide, and that, being different than people who've lost someone to suicide, like having, that lived experience. And I really liked that term. But I'd heard of wounded healer, and I would definitely I remember when researching for my thesis, like I would search that term because that's what a lot of things are under.
A lot of Christianity shit comes up though, which was
I think totally. Yeah. I think it just like, it's such a range. And I think the archetype, like, it makes sense. Like, and I appreciate the like meaning behind it. I think I don't necessarily use the term for like myself, but I've attended things like at conferences that were like a session about wounded healers or like things like that. But yeah, I think I tend to use like the term like having lived experience. And, I think that's been such a foundational part to my therapist identity, because I think it's really important that we acknowledge our lived experience and how that might show up, and like being aware of that is super important, so that we're able to like hold space for our clients and like, and be able to decipher like, when is my lived experience an asset in this situation? Like, times where I do choose to self-disclose, and also times where I'm not actively self-disclosing, but my lived experience is informing my outlook or my conceptualization or something, and not in a way where it's like I'm centered, but of a way of just like, this is how we also access empathy, how we access these different things. And I do think even just lived experience of being in therapy and like having a range of bad experiences and good ones has helped me a lot with clients, of being like, I get that like you might have had not good experiences, and like being able to name of like, you're allowed to be suspicious of me. Of like, and I get that. So I think the term can be useful for us to just like finding community, I think, because a lot of things use that. Because for a while, I think that was really the only term really. But I have seen some shifts in like a lot of different ways people describe it.
Well, and every time I have a depressive episode, or I'm like real in my trauma or whatever it is, I'm like, this is what makes me a good therapist, because I remember how it feels, right? Every time I'm in the depths of despair, in whatever way, I'm like, this is how my clients feel. Do not forget how this feels.
Yes. Yeah. I one time went to a talk by like a colleague and friend, Stacy Friedenthal, who does a lot of suicide prevention work and works with a lot of suicidality, and also is a suicide attempt survivor and has lived experience. And she talked about like the difference of like, this metaphor of like, if the client is like in this hole in the ground and you are standing up on the ground and you're like calling down to them, versus like getting in there with them, like being like, no, we're going to figure this out together. And I remember really loving that, because it actually made me realize that as much as my lived experience, I think, was helping me in like the theory, I was having a hard time like connecting it with my clients. Like I felt a little distant. Like I was like hesitant to get in the ditch with them, because I was like, I've been here before and I don't want to get
that's nasty.
And so, and so realizing like, oh, but I'm getting in it. I'm actively getting in it. I know how to get out. Like, we're going to figure that, like it is different than when I was in the ditch by myself.
Right.
And so like being able to hold like, oh, I'm in it in a different role, but it helped me realize like, oh, I was like standing up here calling down to them. Like, I know it's hard, but like, I don't know. and get up versus being like, yeah, hold on, let me like get in there with you and we'll like figure this out. And I do think like it can be easy to think my lived experience is like in the past. Like, and I think that was something I also came to terms with in school, being like, yeah, I've done all this work and I've been in therapy and like, yeah, I have. And also I'm not just like suddenly I have no struggles, you know, or suddenly I like never have depression or like, yeah, it's like an active lived experience. Like I am living it just as like my clients are. Just, you know, I have the privilege of having this education and this training and skills that I can help people, you know, when they're in it. And I get help from other therapists when I'm in it too, you know?
Well, and I think suicide in particular, for a person who hasn't experienced what that feels like to want to die, from a liability standpoint, it scares the shit out of us. And so there's a distance that's created there because I feel like I'm supposed to keep you alive rather than just looking at like the function of suicide is to end the pain. That's what the function is, and remembering like that connection is the thing that heals the pain.
Yeah,
so if we crawl in the hole, like, of course we can't stop a potential client from, you know, deciding to kill themselves, but making a connection with them is going to be the best shot that we have in supporting them.
Yeah, I actually just did a keynote presentation for a suicide prevention conference in Wisconsin. And that was like the main point of my talk was about like, I work from like a relational cultural theory and just like the importance of relationships and for suicidality, like, you know, as really boiled down of like, it's pain. And when we feel like the pain's not going to end, the hopelessness. And if the connectedness we have doesn't outweigh the pain and hopelessness, that's when it increases. But if you have that connectedness, whether that's to other people, to your job, to your, you know, to your passions, like just feeling connected to things, that's what keeps us here. And so, you know, thinking of being a therapist, like part of that is that connection. And if clients feel that we are terrified or we're scared or we're uncomfortable, that's going to rupture that connection. And it's understandable. It's obviously feels scary. You know, we're allowed to have feelings, but I think that's where it's so important for like us to have more education on that because we don't get enough of it in grad school. And suicide is something that impacts anyone regardless of their diagnosis. It's not a specific, you know, niche. Like people are like, oh, it's not my niche. I'm like, yes, there is a niche if someone is like coming to therapy for that. But at any point, any of your clients could have that. And so it's like, we need that education. We need to know what resources that are not carceral, that are not just hospitalization the minute someone, you know, says they're having suicidal thoughts. And so I've done a lot of like work also trying to, like I've done illustrations of like, it is a spectrum. Like it is not like the response to someone being like, yeah, I want to die. And the response to someone like, I'm going to kill myself this way at this time. Very different, you know, and a lot of therapists just,
it's all the same.
Like, oh, it's all
you
panic,
should be hospitalized.
Yes. And that can do a lot more harm actually. And so, harm. You know, I always give this spiel with my therapist, with my clients when I'm, you know, going over confidentiality and all of that of like suicidal thoughts. Like I will not panic. We can talk about that. This is when hospitalization comes into play. This is when, you know, here is how we will collaborate on a safety plan. And that safety plan will include things that have nothing to do with like the mental health system even. Like it's people, it's places, you know, it's like, and I do think my lived experience, I don't often like share in session with clients, but like you can find online that I'm a suicide attempt survivor. And I think, you know, that experience definitely informs my work. And I think allows me some more room for working. I don't like always have a ton of clients who experience suicidality. And then sometimes I'll have a bunch at once, you know, but I think it allows me to like be able to enter into those conversations with them and understand the vast spectrum. And one thing my therapist does with me that has really helped normalize, because I think a lot of times I'd feel like shame over still having suicidal thoughts sometimes.
Oh, really?
So it was like, you're not allowed to have them because you're a therapist. And she's like, no, that's a neural pathway in your brain that has been formed from when you were younger. And so your brain is going to think of that when overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, and I've used that with clients and it's helped them a lot. Just seeing like, that has been formed in your brain. And so that is a pathway that is there and we're finding other ones, but like, it's going to come up. And also it can just be a signal of, oh, if that's coming up, that means something's off. Like what is going on that's not feeling right or good or feeling trapped, you know? And so looking at it as just information of like, that's a signal. What do we do with that?
My heart is fluttering because I mean, that's my exact experience because I didn't really put all the pieces together because I never attempted suicide, but I was chronically suicidal as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I first really like had all of the awareness online and had those feelings as an adult, I was like, oh, and it was after like a family thing. And I was like, oh, this is why I felt this way my entire childhood. And then since then, I use it as I know that I've worked myself into an unworkable situation that I feel there's no way out of when I start to feel like I want to die. And so then that's just an indicator to me that I need to make a major change or I need to do something really serious to help myself.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. That it's a signal that something needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's really shifted how I think about suicidality for myself, but also with clients. And I can see how it has helped them, which I always love when like, when my therapist will tell me something and I'm like, they're like the grand therapist to my clients. And I'm like, when I'm like, I feel like it's like, you're like passing on knowledge of like their therapist told them and then they told me and then I'm telling my clients and then I have therapist clients and I'm like, who knows, maybe they tell their, their clients. And it also feels like a beautiful, like almost like an intergenerational like thing of like that passing down.
And we're reparenting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, like I know my therapist has lived experience and when they shared that with me, because it, was relevant to what we were talking about, it was so helpful. And so it also helps me to like, be like, yeah, like this can be really beneficial to people. And like, especially I think to therapists, like my like clients I have who are therapists, like getting to model like, here's what it's like for me to be a therapist with lived experience and processing that experience for them too.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of things that help, let's see if I can get a good like, is that a good sound of the book? This is what the book sounds like.
Some ASMR.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I just talk really softly, right? Is that right? Okay, that's creepy. You have a book, and I don't want to say you wrote a book because you drew a book. You like, you birthed a book.
I did.
I mean, if you've ever seen Alyse's art, you know that this is going to be a colorful, beautiful, queer, neurodivergent like thing that popped out of your creative womb. Tell us about the Big Feelings Survival Guide.
Yeah. I've been working on it for so long. It feels very surreal for it to be out in the world. Yeah, I had a publisher reach out to me because I had made I'd self-published like a workbook for my undergrad thesis project.
Aww.
And I did like a Kickstarter and I'd gotten some prints of it, but I like hadn't ordered it in a while, but somehow they got a copy of it and, were following me on Instagram and they were like, have you ever thought about writing another book? And I was like, maybe. And so, we connected about it and it uses some of the same, like the format of it being organized by emotions is the same for my self-published book. But this one, it's like kind of cool to see them next to each other because that one was before I really started illustrating a lot. I wasn't really illustrating in undergrad actually as much. And so that one was really more just like the hand lettering of the prompts and there were drawings in it, but they just are not as much of my style that is honed now of like, and it also wasn't in color. And so it's really interesting to see that just like my artistic growth too. But,
cool.
But yeah, I've always loved DBT. I did DBT as a teenager. And it helped me a lot with just like navigating like a lot of big feelings. Yeah. And I loved art therapy too. And I felt like, DBT had so many worksheets and so many skills and all these things. And I was like, I feel like these lend itself really well to like having a more creative way of engaging with the skills. And so I did a paper on it in undergrad. Now I'm remembering. So I did some research about like the combination of DBT, and there is a book for art therapists of like prompts based on DBT, but no like workbooks or anything. And so I remember as a teenager, I'd like go to the self-help section of Barnes & Noble and I'd like sit on the floor and I'd like just look through all the books and I was like, these are all so boring. Like I was like, I wanted something to help and like be able to work on outside of therapy, but like I just would get one and I'd be like, just so much writing. It's all these blocks of text.
Right.
And then there were creative workbooks that I liked, but they weren't clinical. They just
Right.
were like fun little art things. And so I was like, okay, can we like get one that's both?
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's where that like idea has just sat with me for a long time of like wanting that combination. So yeah, it felt really special to get to like really translate DBT skills into these. Like I always joke with my clients, they know me as like, I'll have these like metaphors that just randomly come into my brain. I think part of that is, I mean, as being a therapist in general, but I think especially being an art therapist, we work a lot with metaphor.
Yeah.
So I just am constantly like clients will like say something to me. I'm like, that makes me think. And it'll be like the most random metaphor.
Yeah.
I'm like, stay with me. And they're always like chuckle and they're like, okay.
Yeah, I'll bring it back. I swear.
Yeah. I'm like, I promise this is related.
Yeah.
Like, but it kind of felt like a similar process of I'd like look at the DBT skill and then I'd be like, okay, what sort of like way can I do this? So like, for the describe skill, I have you design a book cover. So like the metaphor of being like, you know, a book cover is describing the book, like write about the emotion, you know, make an image to represent that emotion. And so just using these like ideas and motifs, like to have a creative prompt that is also teaching you the skill. And I want people to be able to use it, whether they know DBT or they don't, or whether they're in therapy or they're not, and try to give enough information, but not like such an overwhelming amount. Like it's not like the DBT handbook where like that's where you'll learn all of the stuff about the skill. Right. This is like a little like taste of like, here's how you could use this. If this is helpful to you, definitely go learn more and definitely go like dive deeper into that work.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I mean, I don't even know you enough to say I'm proud of you, but like birthing something like this is such a labor. I'm using a lot of like very pregnancy terms. I don't know why. I'm not, I don't want one. No, thank you. But it's just, it's beautiful. And I'm proud of you. I hope that doesn't feel patronizing at all.
It doesn't. I'm definitely proud of myself, and it's helpful too to like step up and be like, oh yeah, I did do that. I did publish a book. Right? You know, I did write and illustrate this.
Well, and I think about the kiddo who wanted to die and how proud that kiddo is of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like when writing the acknowledgements and the intro and like all of that, I definitely was, thinking about that a lot, because also it was like their idea, like me being a teenager being like, I really want something that's both like, and to like years later be like, all right, well, no one beat it, so I'm doing it, you know, and like the beauty in that, and of like dedicating the book to me and to everyone who has big feelings, and like, I think I do thank myself in the acknowledgements of like, thank you to my younger, you know, self for getting me here, you know, even though sometimes she tried really hard to not, but being grateful for, you know, for that path and that journey, because I wouldn't be making this, or, you know, if I didn't have those experiences.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, tell people how they can find you, where they can find you, all the things.
Yeah, totally. Well, most things are just my full name, Alyse Ruriani. On Instagram, first and last name. You can find me on there. And same with TikTok, same with Twitter, all the social media pretty much.
Oh, you're still on the Twitters, eh?
I am. I don't, honestly though, I'm always like, Twitter, I occasionally talk about mental health. Honestly, it's mostly tweets about Paramore, because I'm a big Paramore fan, and that's where the Paramore fan community is. So if you look at their very different vibes than my Instagram.
That's funny.
But yeah, and then my website is just AlyseRuriani.com, and then you can learn more about my work, and also my online shop to get some stickers and things.
Get those cutie stickers. So, well, now I'm thinking that you and I must go to karaoke and do some misery business.
Yes.
Okay, let's make that happen. Yeah. You know, we could like make a benefit or something. I'm sure there's something we could do, and it's just like all Paramore songs.
That I would be down. I'm down for most things Paramore.
Okay.
Like, they've been, and it's a way for me to connect with younger me too. They've been my favorite band since I was like 12, maybe. And feel like their music kind of grew with me. And so I just think also another way of like the power of like expressive medium, you know, like whether it's art, music, writing, all of those. Yeah, you can always catch me singing some Paramore at karaoke.
Well, then I'll see you there.
Yeah, perfect.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally, because I reached out to you like 2 years ago, I think. And then I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. I should like check in again. And it was the right time.
It was. I'm really glad glad you did. Because thanks to the ADHD and pandemic, sometimes things just went away. But I feel like good timing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for reaching back out and that we made time to do this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.